Prisons date back to 1000 BCE. And while they have changed quite a bit over the last 3,000 years, one thing has always remained true about them. The people placed in them were supposed to stay in them. But it seems that sometime in the 1700s, Jack Sheppard didn't get the message. I'm Mick Biddick, and you're listening to History is Criminal. In this episode, we'll take a look at the OG of escape artists, Jack Sheppard, aka Honest Jack, Jack the Lad, and Gentleman Jack. In some historical sources, including Daniel Defoe, yes, the author of Robinson Crusoe, who knew Jack Sheppard personally, in his work, The History and the Remarkable Life of John Sheppard, he is known as John. But as Jack is often used as a nickname for John, and the vast majority of sources he's called Jack will refer to him as Jack. My interest in Jack Sheppard came about because of the TV show Lost. While watching the show, and if you're a fan of the show, you will recall that many of the characters were named for famous historical figures. If you're not familiar with the show, it follows a group of plane crash survivors on a mysterious island, but among the survivors are John Locke, a character named Danielle Rousseau, obviously a nod to Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Kate Austen, a nod to John Austen, Desmond Hume, who was Scottish, obviously a nod to the Scottish philosopher David Hume, and, of course, one Edmund Burke. In fact, 8 characters on the show are named for famous philosophers. The survivors even run into a character named Faraday, who, of course, works with electricity. And so, the main lead male character was named Jack Sheppard, although spelling Sheperpard seems to have been named after some historical figure, but for the life of me, I cannot think of a famous Jack Sheppard. Now, a lot of people speculate on the meaning of this character's name. He was the de facto leader of the group, so Sheppard made some sense from that perspective. Others point to a possible biblical reference in the name as him being the shepherd of this group or flock. Right or wrong, I thought the name had to have a more historical context, given how many other names on the show were rooted in history. So, with a little research, I found the story of Jack Sheppard, spelling Sheppard. As Jack on the show seemed to be focused on trying to get the band off of the island or escape the island, it seems that a man famous for escaping was either intentional on the part of the show's creators or a crazily close coincidence. Honestly, I didn't care enough to write the producers of the show, so in my mind, at least, the TV character was named for the OG escape artist, Jack Sheppard. Now on to our Jack. Our Jack was born March 4th, 1702, to a poor family of tradespeople in Spitalfields, Middlesex, England. For us Americans, this is basically a part of London north of the Tower Bridge. He was able to get an apprenticeship as a carpenter. This would give Jack a decent living at the end of his apprenticeship. A typical carpenter's apprentice would work for a master carpenter for 7 years or so, and then be able to open his own shop. Jack would have been very lucky to get this apprenticeship, as unskilled labor in the early 18th century in London was a hard life, near starvation. By all accounts, Jack was good at his job. He was treated well by his boss, a Mr. Wood. Jack was small of stature, good-looking, charming, and clever. He was able to find people that trusted him. But, as Defoe would describe Jack, he was a youth in age and person, though an old man in sin. Unquote. It seems that Jack became bored with the daily grind of carpentry and was known to hang out in the seedier parts of town. It was there that young Jack, maybe 19 or 20 at the time, met and fell in love with Elizabeth Lyon, a.k.a. Edgeworth Bess. Story has it that Bess was married to a soldier who may or may not have died, that seems a little cloudy, and that she was a known prostitute. This backstory would make sense at the time. Had Bess been widowed or abandoned by a common soldier, she would have had a hard time making a life for herself in the early 18th century, and very well may have turned to prostitution to survive. Defoe, however, with the morality of his age, marks this as the point when Jack's life turns from once one of promise to one of villainy. It seems that Jack and Bess lived as man and wife, meaning they were sleeping together but not living in the same house, as Jack, as an apprentice, would live in his boss's shop. Defoe makes no question about it. This relationship started Jack's life of crime. It seems that in the 1700s, a young man could only turn to crime if turned by a woman, at least according to Defoe. While it is true there is no record of Jack committing a crime before meeting Bess, it is also true that Jack committed many of his crimes without Bess. In any case, in his 6th year of his carpentry apprenticeship, with only a handful of months left to go, Jack would leave his boss and start a short but wildly busy life as a criminal. Now, the reality is, it might not have been totally Jack's choice to leave. Jack and Mr. Wood seem to have had a falling out over what is unclear, and this might have even been physical at one point. Wood then suspected Jack of robbing a neighbor. At this point, Wood kept Jack on as an apprentice for some reason. Maybe it was the fact that Jack had less than a year to go. Maybe by this time, Jack was a skilled enough carpenter that Mr. Wood really needed Jack's help. Whatever the reason, Jack stayed on with Wood for a little while longer, even though his behavior was starting to wear on the Woods. One night, Jack stayed out drinking quite late, and the Woods locked him out of the house. The next morning, they woke to find Jack snuggled up, sleeping in his bed. It would seem he simply broke into the house and went to bed. As Defoe would write, quote, that the bars have not been made that can keep either him in or out. This ability to get past locks was about to serve Jack well as he left his apprenticeship. Most of Jack's crimes throughout his career were fairly petty but numerous, but it was his jailbreaks that would make Jack a bit of a folk hero. Edgeworth Bess was arrested accused of stealing a ring. Bess would be housed at St. Gil's Roundhouse. In the early 1700s, these roundhouses were basically low-security jails, and this one seems to have been very low security. Think more like a bad motel and less Rikers Island. It seems Jack just walked in and took the keys from the old couple who, quote, had care of the place, unquote. So suffice it to say, this was not a sophisticated jailbreak. July 723, Jack would take part in his first robbery that we know of. Having been sent to repair a home, while there he would make off with a 24-yard roll of fabric. Now, fabric was a very valuable commodity in the 1700s and will be a part of many of Jack's robberies. His second known robbery was much slicker. He removed iron bars from a basement window of a boarding house and slipped in. While inside, he was able to sneak out goods and coins valued at 21 pounds, a tidy sum for the early 1700s. Then Jack replaced the bars. This caused suspicion to fall on a woman who was lodging at the house at the time. We only know about this robbery because Jack later told the story to Defoe. It was at this time that Jack officially left his apprenticeship. With no more apprenticing, he no longer had a home. Bess, however, was able to introduce Jack to a whole new crew to run with. Joseph Blake, a.k.a. Blueskin, William Fields, and James Sykes, a.k.a. Helen Fury. They became Jack's accomplices. Each of them had already made a name for themselves as a highwayman and thief. For a home, Jack traded his carpentry skills for room and board with a Mr. Charles. Once his work for Mr. Charles was completed, Jack robbed him. Jack told this story to a priest one time when he was being held in the common hold, think Gen Pop, at Newgate Prison. That is before he broke out of the prison. In February 1724, Thomas, Jack's brother, was arrested for petty theft. Thomas would cut a deal and gave the authorities Jack and Bess's names in connection with the break-in the three had pulled earlier. Now, this made Jack a wanted man, but it did not slow Jack down. He was on quite the crime spree at this point and was making a name for himself as a breaking and entering specialist. Sykes, aka Helen Fury, was himself captured. He made a deal to turn Jack into the authorities. He was able to get word to Jack that he wanted to meet up. When Jack arrived at the location given to him, he found instead of Sykes, a constable. Jack was arrested and housed in St. Gil's Roundhouse. This time, he was locked in the top floor, 2 floors above the street level. This is going to be the arrest that will start the legend of Jack Sheppard. He would use a leg from a broken chair and busted a hole in the roof, climbed up on the roof, and then, not making this up, he fashioned a rope out of bed sheets. Now, I don't know if he was the first person to ever do this. I never thought that this would work in reality, but Jack used his bed sheets as a rope and then lowered himself down 2 stories to the courtyard and then just walked away. This was all within 2 hours of being initially arrested. Jack was out on the streets free. Jack was able to continue a life of petty theft around the greater London area without getting picked up. Then, on the 19th of May, 1724, Jack and a man named Benson came upon a scene of a man yelling, accusing a woman of trying to steal his watch. Jack and Benson worked their way into the crowd and actually picked the man's pocket while he was accusing the woman of stealing his watch. They took the very watch that he was accusing the woman of stealing. However, bad luck stepped in and they were spotted taking the watch. Benson was able to make a clean getaway, but Jack was caught. Jack found himself in jail now for a second time. Bess, hearing Jack had been locked up, came to see him in jail. This might not have been the smartest move on her part. Remember, she was also named by Jack's brother as part of the team that had taken part in the earlier robbery. And Bess was well enough known that she was arrested while visiting Jack. A judge ordered that they be sent to New Prison with the idea of them transporting them to the infamous Newgate prison. Bess and Jack were housed together in the Newgate ward of New Prison. Understand, New Prison and Newgate are 2 different places. Jack and Bess were housed in a section of New Prison that was more secure before they were to be moved to Newgate. To make sure Jack didn't get up to anything funny, he had a 14-pound leg iron attached to him. But somehow, using crude tools, Jack worked for 4 days to loosen and remove the bars from the window. Once again, he fashioned a rope of bed sheets. And because Bess was larger than Jack, Jack had to work very difficultly to get her through the bars. Once through the bars, he was able to lower her down first. Then Jack climbed down himself. This, however, only got them into an inner courtyard. A 25-foot wall still stood between them and the outside. Now, officially, the story is Jack made a crude ladder from material found in the prison yard. To me, that seems like maybe somebody forgot to put a ladder away and then added that part of the story of Jack magically building a ladder out of things he found in the courtyard in order to cover their own butts. Then again, Jack does seem to have mad skills. In any case, with the ladder, Jack and Bess scaled the outer wall and were once again free. The leg irons and iron bars were housed at the prison to, quote, testify and preserve the memory of this extraordinary villainy, unquote. Out of prison, Jack returned to his old neighborhood and goes right back to robbing people. Jack will team up with 2 new partners, Charles Grace and Anthony Lamb, to rob a Mr. Barton. Barton had spent the night drinking heavily, so when the 3 broke into his home, they found him solidly sound asleep. While Barton slept, Grace stood over him with a pistol, having orders to shoot if he woke up. Luckily for Barton, he never so much as moved. The robbery was successful, and Grace seems to have just vanished to never be heard from again. Lamb, on the other hand, was caught and confessed everything. For his part in the robbery, he was sentenced to transportation. That is, to be sent or moved to the colonies. This would often mean serving as an indentured servant for a term, often in Georgia or Australia. Jack would later confirm this story while in prison, only Jack added that they had debated if they should just shoot everybody in the house. Fortunately for those home at the time, they elected not to. Later the same month, Jack, working with Blueskin and William Fields, planned to break into the home of a wealthy merchant named Mr. Kneeborn. Kneeborn was tipped off that his home was going to be robbed, so he set a trap. He had the local watchman, think beat cop, watch his house. Then he and his servants stayed up armed and awaited the thieves. At approximately 2 a.m., Jack and his crew made their move, but they spotted a maid milling about the house and left. After a week had passed, Kneeborn, most likely believing the tip to be no good, let his guard down. Jack, Blueskin, and Fields broke in through the basement. They cut 2 large oak beams and were able to spend 3 hours removing goods from the house. They got away with 108 yards of wool, 5 yards of bay cloth. I wasn't able to find out what that actually is. A tie wig, a beaver hat, 2 silver spoons, I'm guessing large serving spoons. I would hate to think they just took 2 soup spoons. A handkerchief, I really hope it was nice, like fine silk or something, and a penknife, all roughly totaling a 50-pound value. With the exchange rate at the time I'm writing this, it actually comes out to about 17,000 US today. So this was a fairly nice score. 19th of July, Jack and Blueskin tried their hands at being highwaymen. They stop and rob a coach at gunpoint. Unfortunately for them, the person riding in the coach was a, quote, ladies' woman. So think rich lady's personal servant. They were able to take from her a half a crown, about a day's wages for a typical laborer in the 1720s. When the footman came around the coach to stop them, Jack used the gun to force the man to back down. The next night, the two essentially mugged a man named Mr. Partager. This was no flashy crime or daring skill, it was straight up strong-armed robbery. Blueskin pistol whipped the man 3 times, each time knocking him to the ground. Jack would help the man back up, and Blueskin would pistol whip him again. Jack was now becoming a well-known figure and was suspected in many more robberies. But, at least for now, he was staying ahead of the law. Edgeworth Bess, unfortunately for her, was arrested on July 22nd. Facing a harsh sentence, she made a deal to trade Jack's location for a lighter punishment. She informed the constable that Jack could be found at Blueskin's mother's house. The constables were able to take Jack into custody, reportedly without incident. Jack was charged with several robberies, and he was actually acquitted of 2 of the robberies when the court found there was not enough evidence to connect him to the crimes. Yet, when tried for the break-in at Kneeborn's house, he was found guilty. Kneeborn was able to confront Jack while he was in prison. He asked Jack how he could rob him when he had always treated him so kindly, and Jack said that it had been Blueskin and Fields' idea, and he was drawn in by ill company. End quote. Jack's reputation and previous escapes had proved to have an impact on the court. After all, it seemed that locking him up would do little good to keep him from committing more crimes. The judge, likely feeling that Jack could not be redeemed, sentenced him to be hanged. The court also made the decision to not bring more indictments against Jack. It is not like you could hang him more than once, and it would turn out to make little difference as Jack was already planning his next escape, this time from the infamous Newgate prison. It is unclear where Jack acquired the items, but at some point he was passed a watch spring, a small file, and a saw. A great many people had come to see the famous Jack Sheppard, and he developed quite a following as a dashing rebel figure. This was no doubt due to the ongoing class conflict in 18th century England. You would think, with a known escape artist, they'd be a little more cautious as to who they let come see him and what was passed to him, but they weren't. Bess and a second woman came to visit Jack. Bess, this time, will not be recognized and arrested. Remember, Bess had given Jack up to cut a deal, but this seems to have been her way to repay him. After talking with Jack, Bess and the second woman distracted the guards. Now, you can use your imagination as to how they distracted the guards, but given Bess's known profession, one can probably figure it out. They were taking no chances with Jack this time, though. He was secured to the floor with a reported 300 pounds of chains and was wearing leg irons. This was little concern to Jack, however. Using a bent nail, he was able to slip off the handcuffs. Then he forced the lock, holding him to the floor with the chains. Then it was simply a matter of getting through the bars and scaling to the roof, which of course took Jack a little trouble. Once on the roof, he was able to make it to the roof of a neighboring building, climbed through the window of a room, and walked out on the street, all while still in leg irons. In a pure stroke of luck, he came upon a passing shoemaker who used his tools to remove Jack's leg irons. Newspapers at this point could not get enough of Honest Jack, as he was being called, and he developed a bit of a folk following, despite being a well-known and confessed thief. Contemporaries talk about Jack as a charmer, good-looking. Now, he was clearly no Robin Hood, and the English should know that, having invented the character, but nonetheless, people seem to have loved him. Now, with a death warrant hanging over his head, Jack would flee London to the safety of the continent or the colonies and live happily ever after. Of course not. He didn't even leave his neighborhood. He even told the story of how he sat down in a pub having a drink and listening to the guards from Newgate at the end of the bar discussing the masterful escape from prison. He was seen all around the area, but people said they were afraid to try and capture him as he might be packing a pistol. A man named Page started to help Jack with some of his needs, like getting food and a place to sleep. Jack and Page were even stopped by a sheriff officer. The deputy let Jack go, believing him to be of no importance. Then he questioned Page until he was convinced Page knew nothing. Now, remember, it was 1724, so the deputy would have been working off of an oral description or at best a drawing. So you have to cut the deputy a little slack for not recognizing Jack. In the meantime, Bess was again arrested, but was unable to give up any information on Jack or refused to tell. This run of luck would not last long. Jack and Page were spotted by one of the Newgate guards. Constables, watchmen, and other guards converged on the scene. At least one report says Jack was too drunk to resist, but Defoe, in his biography, simply has Jack outgunned and outnumbered. And Jack found himself back in Newgate prison. Page claimed to know nothing of the robberies or even Jack's escape, and he stated he was simply helping out of kindness. This seems a little hard to believe since Jack was the talk of the town and his exploits were the things of legend, but the reality was the authorities had no interest in Page. Jack, for his part, was convinced Bess had turned on him again and blamed her for all of his misfortunes. Now there was quite the discussion and a matter of legality if they needed to issue a new death warrant or if they could just use the last one. It was decided that a new warrant would have to be issued. This would give Jack more time to plot another jailbreak. He was caught with a file and a hollowed-out Bible. Then he was found in possession of 2 files, a chisel, and a hammer that had all been hid in the rush of a chair. And I admit I had to look up what a rush of a chair was. It's the mat usually woven that you sit on. So this was hidden between the top and bottom layer. I would assume if you sat on this, you would probably notice something. They then moved Jack to a part of the prison known as the castle and placed him under close guard. Fool me once, shame on me. Fool me three or more times, I might just be a dumbass. So they decided to actually watch him this time. But, and God only knows why, he was still allowed visitors. And reportedly, he had a lot of them, including some big movers and shakers, like the Lord High Mayor of London. Witnesses said Jack was always in a good mood and laughing and joking with those who came to see him. When he did reflect on his life, he said that as an apprentice, women had looked down on him. However, Bess and the other prostitutes were nice to him, and he started to change his view on things. Maybe it was the idea that the proper people in town were rude and condescending, while the supposed lower classes seemed like decent people to him. This could have caused the 19-20-year-old Jack's moral compass to swing. This might be why Defoe believes this to be the point when Jack became a villain. A priest visited Jack and allowed him a chance for absolution. Jack reportedly said that he was too busy trying to think of a way to escape to give absolution much thought, but if he didn't come up with something, a plan, he would resign himself to the mercy of God Almighty. The 2nd of October, Blueskin was arrested. He asked the man, while he was being arrested, if he had put in a good word for him. When the man refused, Blueskin grabbed the man by the neck, pulled a knife, and attempted to stab him in the neck. Out of pure luck, the knife got tangled in the fabric around the man's neck, and the guards were able to disarm and subdue Blueskin. Blueskin yelled, if he could have, he would have cut the man's head off and thrown it in the yard. I'm not sure why Blueskin was not searched before or searched better for how he got the knife, but it really seems like 1700s jails may have been in need of a security update. October 10, Anthony Lamb, Thomas Sheppard, Jack's brother, and 95 others were to be shipped from Newgate for transportation to the colonies. Thomas begged to be able to talk with Jack, but was turned down. They had been able to see each other earlier, but at a far enough distance to prevent them from touching or keeping Thomas from passing anything to him. A petition was even presented to King George I asking that Jack's sentence be reduced to transportation, but it was rejected. Jack was offered a chance to reduce his sentence if he turned witness against his associates, but Jack refused. On the 15th of October, Jack ate dinner and spoke with several guards, even joking with them. He told them good night and thanked them for their kindness, and asked them to return as early as possible the next morning. Now, with Jack's history, this really should have raised some questions, but no, they just thought it was Jack being Jack. After midnight, a watchman found a door open on a house adjoining Newgate. He yelled at the house and concluded it was just a mistake and someone had forgotten to shut the door. That morning, when the guard came in to feed Jack breakfast, he unlocked the double doors to the castle room to find bricks, rubble, all over the floor, but no Jack. Most of the details of Jack's escape this time are left as a mystery. It seems, though, he broke the handcuffs by twisting them, then broke a hole in the wall using an iron bar taken from the chimney, picked the lock holding him to the floor, then at some point, maybe while on the roof, got out of his leg irons. The leg irons were never recovered, and some people thought maybe they'd been dropped down a chimney. And you guessed it, using a rope made out of bed sheets, I don't know, maybe just stop giving the guy bed sheets, lowered himself to the ground. He would do all of this in near total darkness without making enough noise to alarm the guards. Jack didn't stay free for long this time before recapturing, and this would be the last time he managed to escape. That doesn't mean there wasn't a plan. In the meantime, Blueskin was convicted and sentenced to death. He was executed on November 11th. Jack's execution date was set for 5 days later, on November 16th, 1724. He was only 22 years old. As Jack made his way to the gallows in Tyburn, women dressed in white lined the streets. Some threw flowers and openly wept. It seems, though, that there was one final plan. This one involving the author Daniel Defoe and his publisher, a man named Appleby. Jack, being of small stature, would strangle at the end of the noose as opposed to his neck breaking. By law, a body had to hang for 15 minutes. So had planned to quickly take the body at the end of the 15-minute mark to try and revive Jack. There had been many instances of people being revived after 15 minutes if the neck hadn't broken. And this is where the story gets confusing. Some sources say the crowd, not wanting to see Jack suffer the painful, slow death of strangulation, rushed forward and pulled on Jack's legs to speed his death. Other sources claim the crowd feared that Defoe and Appleby were going to take Jack's body for dissection. You see, in the 1700s, only bodies of condemned criminals could be legally dissected by medical students. And so they feared that Jack would be one of these corpses taken for dissection. Not wanting their hero to be carved up by would-be doctors, they blocked Defoe and Applegate from gaining access to the gallows. In any case, John Jack Sheppard would fail to make that final mistake. He's buried at St. Martin-in-the-Fields Cemetery in the borough of Camden in London. In the aftermath, Jack would make his way into popular culture of the time. Plays were written and performed about his life. In addition to Defoe's biography, others wrote about him. John Gay's 1728 Baker opera was based on Jack's life. Even over 100 years later, he was still an obsession of Londoners. William Harrison Ainsworth wrote a novelization of the life of Jack Sheppard in 1840. In the book, Jack is presented as a swashbuckling hero, causing a new generation of young people to idolize him. The city became so concerned that they refused to license any play with Jack Sheppard in the title for the next 40 years. In the end, Jack Sheppard was a thief who seemed more interested in the chase than the take. He would go down in history as an escape artist who fascinated the people of 18th century London and still has the ability to interest us 300 years later. I'd like to give a shout out to our sources, of course, Daniel Defoe's History of the Remarkable Life of John Sheppard, historyuk.com and archive.com. Please listen to our next episode as we take a look at the first convicted murderer in the British colonies in America and other crimes among the Pilgrims. Until then, this has been History is Criminal.